She was 8 months pregnant when I handed her a suitcase and told her to leave. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I simply looked at her the way you look at a piece of furniture that no longer fits the room and said, "The Prescott family has standards." My son stood in the doorway. He said nothing. He chose nothing. He was raised to obey. She lifted that bag, walked to the black car waiting outside, and I watched the gates close behind her. I felt calm. I felt clean. I had removed the obstacle. I had protected the legacy. I had won. But here is what I did not know. That quiet girl in that black car, watching my gates disappear behind her, her father had spent 30 years building a weapon, and he had aimed it directly at me. Every woman who has ever been told she is not enough, this story is proof that someone, somewhere, was already building your fortress before you even knew you needed one. If this story shook something inside you, drop a comment telling me whose side you're on, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe, because every week I bring you stories that hit different.
For those who are new to this way of thinking, welcome. Understand this principle so you never miss the point. A new lesson arrives every week. You do not want to miss the consequences of weakness. The sound was so clean. A silver blade parting an envelope. It was as clean as the decision I had made. I set the document down. My reflection was faint in the polished table. My posture was straight. My resolve was absolute. I was simply removing an obstacle, a piece of furniture that no longer fit. The guest house is ready, I said, but that is no longer an option. You will need to find a permanent solution elsewhere. Claire Whitmore stood in the archway of the dining room, a room she would not enter again. Her condition was obvious. Her discomfort was not my concern. She wore my son's old sweatshirt. She was 8 months pregnant. She did not seem to grasp the situation. "I am sorry," she began, as if this were a conversation. I finally looked at her. My gaze was not cruel. It was clear. It was the look of a problem being solved. "The Prescott family has standards," I explained. "Standards we failed to communicate when Donovan brought you here. Our lawyer has confirmed everything. The agreement you signed is quite clear." Her hand went to her stomach. A predictable, useless gesture. "I am 8 months pregnant," she said. The words hung in the air like a foolish question. "Yes," I answered. "That is why you must leave now. Before the child is born, it is a cleaner arrangement this way." Cleaner. The words settled the matter. She looked from me to Garrett, in his chair, pretending to read, to the morning light. She looked at the rug she once complimented. Then she looked toward the doorway. Donovan was still standing there. He had been there the entire time. He had not moved. He would not enter the room. He would not speak. He stared at the floor, a study in cowardice. He could not look at the woman in the room. Her hand clutched her phone, a useless lifeline. She almost called to him. I could see the name forming on her lips. A name she thought held power over him. A name she thought meant something. She put the device away. "Donovan," she said. He cleared his throat. He adjusted his cuff. He looked at the wall just past her head. "Claire, my mother has some valid concerns. I am carrying your child." The statement was plain. She expected it to change something. Silence. The clock on the mantel continued its indifferent rhythm. Garrett turned a page of his unread paper. "A car is waiting to take you where you need to go," I said. I was already walking away. The discussion was over. "I had Rosita pack a few things for you. One bag. The lawyers will handle the rest." One bag. She was 8 months pregnant, and she had been condensed to a single suitcase. She lingered for a moment. I knew she was waiting, hoping for someone to speak up, for someone to say this was wrong, that she belonged. No one did. She walked to the front door. The bag was there, a black suitcase, on the marble floor, next to the flower. The flowers I have delivered every Monday. A symbol of the order she disrupted. The bag was heavy. I saw the surprise on her face. It was that small detail that broke her. Not my words, not my son's cowardice. It was the weight of the bag. It told her this was not impulsive. It was a carefully executed plan. It was decided long before today. She lifted it and walked out. The car was waiting, a black car with dark windows. I had arranged for a new driver. No misplaced sympathies. She got inside. The door shut. Through the glass, I watched her look at the house. She waited for a long time. The door did not open. I did not go after her. I watched her pull out her phone. She was calling for help. Of course she was. A friend, perhaps? That Renee. I could imagine the conversation. The panicked voice of someone whose world was just corrected. I need you. The words of the weak, the plea of the unprepared. I imagined the pause on the other end. Where are you? In a car they sent. She would be touching the cold glass. They kicked me out. Then a controlled silence. The friend holding back her useless rage. Are you safe? A question with no good answer. I do not know. Predictable. I am coming. Stay on the phone. She would stay on the phone. She would watch the estate. She tried to claim disappear. She would see the gates close behind her. Her hand would go to her stomach. The child. A final, desperate gambit that had failed. Okay, she would think. Okay, but it was not okay. She would not cry yet. Anger comes before grief. The feeling of a carefully constructed fantasy shattering. She was holding the pieces. She was remembering the day she told my son. Sitting on the bathroom floor, a picture of domestic deceit. She had been terrified and thrilled. A perfect performance. And Donovan, my son, had knelt beside her. He told her it was the best thing that ever happened to him. She believed him. She was certain that he meant it. Now she would be listening to her friend's voice, holding on to it like a piece of wreckage. Okay, the friend would be saying, here is what we will do. You will come here. You will rest. You will tell me everything, and I will listen. Then I will say what I have wanted to say for 2 years. What have you wanted to say? She would ask. Later, the friend would say, first, you come here. And the trap of sentiment would close around her once more. I closed the dining room doors. I leaned my head against the polished wood. It was done. It was necessary. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the glass. People moved through their small lives. A man buying flowers, a woman hailing a cab, a dog straining at its leash. Everything in its proper place, everything orderly. My home smelled of beeswax and old books, the scent of a legacy preserved. It was large and quiet. Every surface was clear, a silver tray, a crystal vase, a portrait of my husband. It was the home of people who understood their position, who guarded it carefully. I sat in the parlor. My hands rested on the arms of my chair. My pulse was steady. I felt calm. I could hear the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. I had to fill the silence. I had to arrange my thoughts as I arranged the silver. She needed to understand her position. I did not hate the girl. Hate is a careless emotion. I simply saw her. I saw the girl Donovan brought home from a place with no history. A place with no significance. She believed she grew up in a respectable town. She did not grow up in the right part of it. I came back with a decanter. I set a glass before my son. He looked at me with that familiar, weak confusion. It was one of the things I had always tried to correct in him. I needed to know what he had told her. He had said nothing of consequence. He never did. I held the heavy crystal in my hand. The weight was comforting. It was real. He had said nothing. He sent a message an hour after her car had departed. He showed me the words on his screen. Donovan, I am so sorry for how that ended. Let us speak when the chaos subsides. I looked from the phone to my son, then back to the phone. When the chaos subsides. I repeated my own words to him. When the chaos subsides. I said, She is carrying your child, I know. She is carrying my grandchild, and she is sleeping on a friend's sofa. A temporary bed, a bed with a flaw in its very center that has likely gone unfixed for years. I set down my glass. And you wish to speak when the chaos subsides. He did not say subside. He said, when the chaos subsides. I paused. He did not even see the distinction. The distinction is you are making it seem like a random event, like some misfortune that simply appeared. A squall, a sudden downpour that has troubled her, a storm that you did not create. My son said nothing. He looked at his hands. That night I slept perfectly. I lay in my own bed, in my own quiet room. The sheets were cool and smooth against my skin. The mattress was firm. There was no city noise, only the distant hum of the house itself, the sound of a legacy breathing. I started to think. I began at the start. Their first meeting in some gallery, the way he had appeared at her side. He said something clever about a painting, something to make him seem thoughtful. He thought he was meeting an artist. He thought he was meeting someone who truly saw the world. I moved through their 3 years. The Christmas he laughed when I noted her dinner was poorly seasoned. The laugh was small. She likely told herself it was of no importance. The hospital gala when I introduced her to several people as Donovan's acquaintance. With a small hesitation before the word, I am sure she dismissed it as a simple quirk of my speech. The conversation we had 6 months ago. I suggested that a woman from her world would find motherhood a difficult role to fill. She told herself it was of no importance. She has been telling herself things were of no importance for 3 years. Foolish, I thought. She was so foolish. The warnings were always present. Every single one was placed directly in her path, and she made the choice not to see them, because seeing them would have meant she had to act on what she saw, and she was so deeply committed to the life she imagined. She chose the illusion over the reality every single time. She was so sure she had married a good man. She built her entire world on that fragile idea. At 6 in the morning, my son's phone rang. He answered on the 4th ring. His voice was heavy. He had been sleeping. I noted this. She had not slept. He had. Claire, he said, I need you to tell me what happened, she said. Not your mother's version of what happened. Your version. A pause. I could hear his shallow breath over the line. I could hear him searching for my words. This family has reservations about the future of your marriage, he said. The sentence was perfect, so utterly practiced that my own breath held. Say that again, she said quietly. There are reservations. Donovan, her voice was steady. That is a statement for the press. Speak to me as a husband. Another silence, longer this time. My father engaged in a business dealing with your family long ago, he said. His voice was lower now, less practiced. There was a faint trace of something beneath it. Perhaps it was shame. An error occurred. My parents believed this union was unwise, considering the past, a business dealing. Her hand must have clenched the phone. What business dealing? She said. I do not have all the facts. What business dealing, Donovan? Silence. Donovan, I think you need to talk to your mother, he said finally. There are facts about your father's finances that I was not aware of until this week. Facts my family, your family. He stopped speaking. The quiet stretched between them, a tangible thing. A space one could measure. In that quiet, she would hear the truth. He knew. He had known something before their wedding day. And now that the Prescotts had determined the arrangement was no longer beneficial, she was being removed. She is not sad. I knew it. She is angry. I will speak with my mother, she said. Her voice was perfectly controlled. And then I will discover exactly what your family knows about my father. And then you and I will have a profoundly different discussion than the one you are rehearsing. She ended the call. She would call her mother. Diane Whitmore. Diane answered instantly, before the second ring, as if she had been holding the phone. Claire? She said. Her voice was thin, the sound of someone who had been anticipating a terrible moment for a very long time, the sound of someone waiting for this exact call. Mother, Claire said, what is there to know about Father's estate that I do not know? A long silence. I need you to drive here, Diane said. There are matters I should have explained to you years ago. Things your father insisted I keep from you until the proper time. I am not imagining things, Claire would think. There was always a secret they were keeping from me. I am leaving now, Claire said. She would get out of that temporary bed. She would find her clothes. She would find her coat. She would go to her friend's room and knock on the door and say, I am going to my mother's house. I will explain it all when I return. Do you require a ride? The friend's voice would come back, also awake, also waiting. No, Claire said. This is something I must face by myself. She walked out into the dawn. The city was only just waking. The light was pale and thin. She started a car. She aimed it toward Connecticut, and she drove toward the disaster her father had left behind for her. The house in that town looked precisely as it always had. White siding, black shutters. The large oak tree stood in the front yard, a symbol of false permanence. The bird feeder in the back that Owen Whitmore had tended to, every Sunday without fail, a pointless ritual. She would sit in her car for a time before she went inside. She would look at the house. She would think of all the simple weekend mornings she lived within its walls. Pancakes. The sound of a radio in the kitchen. Her father at the breakfast table, with his newspaper and his simple white mug and his plain watch and his utterly false, unassuming manner. She never once suspected her father was anything but the man he pretended to be. She went inside. Diane was in the kitchen. She had brewed coffee and had arranged 2 mugs. She had placed a plate of store-bought cookies in the middle of the table. She had staged the scene for this conversation. I noted this. The preparation told me everything about how long Diane had been waiting. They sat opposite one another. Diane would reach out and hold both of Claire's hands. Your father was not the man you knew, Diane said. Claire would look at her mother. She would wait. He was a guarded man. Extremely guarded. You are aware of that. You knew him so well. Diane's grip would tighten around Claire's. It was a masterpiece of planning, a legacy secured through foresight. My son did not understand the true nature of his assignment. Not at first. He saw a girl. I saw a dynasty. 30 years of another man's quiet work, ready for the harvest. This man, Whitmore, had built a financial fortress. He had investments in technology, real estate, and private partnerships. All invisible, all meticulously hidden from the world. He did this for protection, they said. He was cheated once, long ago, by partners who saw his genius and grew greedy. He lost almost everything. It took him 15 years to recover. He learned his lesson. He learned to build walls so no one could ever take from him again. A noble effort. But walls are made to be conquered. When the intelligence first reached my desk, I almost dismissed it. $14 billion, a sum that changes the world. It was held in a trust for his daughter, activating on her 29th birthday. $14 billion. The number was obscene. It was a gravitational force, pulling everything toward it. My son would be the vessel. Donovan would secure our future. He did not need to know the exact figure. He just needed to do his part, and I would handle the rest. The girl's father was a ghost, a man who drove a simple car and read the newspaper on his porch. He drank tea. He called his daughter his greatest success. The sentiment was quaint, but the strategy was brilliant. Absolute independence, he called it, an admirable goal, a fortress built for one. She never suspected. She would walk on that same porch, thinking of her plain father filling a bird feeder, a simple man doing a simple task. She had no idea the feeder was a castle, and the seeds were gold. He knew someone like me would come. He knew the world is full of lions. He saw predators everywhere. People who believe they are entitled to what others have built. So he constructed a fortress for her, a 30-year project to give her an escape. He never burdened her with the knowledge. He wanted her to live a normal life, free from the weight of his wealth, a touching, foolish gesture. He told his daughter nothing, yet he prepared for everything. He built a kingdom and left the key under the mat. It was my duty to my own family to find it first. She would understand in time. This is how the world works. This is how empires are sustained. Owen had covered his tracks well. He had anticipated every contingency. He even structured the trust to protect against a marriage like the one I was arranging. A legal impossibility, he thought. But every fortress has a flaw. The girl's 29th birthday was 6 weeks away. The memories would be her undoing. I knew she would start to see things differently. Donovan's family asking about her past. My wife, Margaret, probing about her father's work. My own casual questions at dinner about his old business partners. We were just mapping the terrain. Every conversation was a reconnaissance mission. Donovan once ended a call quickly when she entered the room. He told her it was my people. He was not lying. They were my people, our people. She thought nothing of it. She never suspected the truth. Did we know about the trust? The question was an insult to my intelligence. Of course we knew. My attorneys had located the estate filings 4.5 years ago, 6 months before Donovan just happened to be at that gallery. He was not there by chance. He was deployed. She deserved a prince, and we gave her one, a small price for a kingdom. The moment she understood would be difficult, but it was a necessary pain. She needed a stronger hand to guide her. My hand. I would protect her inheritance. I would grow it. I would put it to proper use, building something that would last for generations. She needed to contact her lawyer, Sylvia Holloway. It was all part of the process. Her calm was predictable. It was the clarity that comes before surrender. I had been waiting for this moment for 4 years. Sylvia Holloway's office was modest, unassuming. A brownstone in Hartford. It was a clever deception, the humble trappings of immense power. A quiet performance for a serious purpose. Sylvia was 62. She carried the secret like a burden, and it had made her strong. She saw the girl arrive. I am sure she felt a sense of relief. The transfer of responsibility was imminent. She probably told her how much she resembled her father. The pleasantries are always so tedious. Tea would be offered. Then the girl would ask for the truth. Sylvia would explain how Owen Whitmore built his empire, how he moved in silence, identifying investments no one else could see. A patient, observant man. He understood markets with a clarity that bordered on prophecy. He could wait a decade for a plan to mature. The girl would ask why he never told her. Sylvia would offer 2 reasons. First, to protect her identity, to let her build a life on her own terms, free from the shadow of his wealth. A noble sentiment. Second, he was afraid that the knowledge would make her a target while she was young and vulnerable. The exact scenario I had engineered. He was afraid of me, or someone like me, a man who understood power. He was right to be afraid. We could not prove it was us, Sylvia would say. She would be careful. She would mention searches by a law firm connected to my holdings, searches that happened 6 months before Donovan appeared at that gallery. The room would grow cold. The girl would realize she was not loved. She was acquired. It was not personal. It was business, clear and solid. She would ask about the marriage clause. Sylvia would show her the page. The trust was hers alone, regardless of marital status. A legal wall. Her father had been specific. He had used 3 attorneys to make the language unbreakable. He anticipated a son like mine. He anticipated my ambition. He was a worthy adversary, even in death. But he made one mistake. He assumed his daughter would want what he wanted. I could see the wheels turning in Sylvia's mind. She would allow herself a small, triumphant smile. She had one last card to play, one folder left on the desk. Your father did not just leave you money, she would say. He left you leverage. And she would push it across the table. The game was just beginning. It had happened. She knew. She possessed 19%. Sylvia had confirmed it. 11 years of silent acquisition. A creeping poison left by her father. A vendetta that started 2 years after we corrected his initial fraud. A fraud we helped orchestrate to teach him a lesson. Claire was sitting with this truth now. Her father had been a thief. He lost everything he deserved to lose. He spent 15 years rebuilding, only to start his slow, quiet war. 11 years he spent buying his way back inside our walls. A 30-year game. He never shared the score. Only the final move mattered. That 19%, she thought, would give her power at our table. Our board changes next month. Sylvia was already moving. She was talking to other shareholders, people unhappy with my family's leadership. With her 19%, she could rally a coalition. They would hold 41%, enough to start a war, enough to demand reviews, enough to make my family understand their error. We had not simply failed to control Claire Whitmore, we had armed her against us. That night, she was probably restless. I could picture her spreading papers on the floor, organizing our secrets by date, by name. Her friend Renee was likely watching her, watching this unbelievable story unfold. Your father owned a piece of us, Renee would say. He owned a part of everything. The media company, the hotels, the logistics firm. Renee would see the truth now. She would understand what we were up against. Claire probably felt the strain. 8 months pregnant, sitting on a floor surrounded by the secret empire of a man who pretended to be simple. He drove a plain car. He wore a simple watch. He fed the birds on Sunday. Then the laughter would start. The kind that breaks free after being held down for years. Renee would think she was breaking, but it would be the opposite. It was a rebirth. She would see the papers. $14 billion, 19% of Prescott Holdings, an unbreakable trust, a birthday just 6 weeks away. She only had to survive until then. I knew she would think that, but we moved faster. 3 days after her meeting, our attorney sent the papers. A petition for annulment. The grounds were fraud. Her concealment of material financial information. The irony was a necessary weapon. Her friend Renee would read it slowly. She would see the words. The accusation. They are calling you a fraud, she would say. Yes, Claire would reply. Mimi. The woman who just discovered her fortune is the fraud, not the family who sent me to secure it. It is a bold move, she would admit. She would have to be detached. It was the only way to face it. Because beneath that cool surface was a truth she could not yet voice. She was afraid. She had 37 days until her 29th birthday. She was pregnant. She slept on a pull-out sofa. She had a trust she could not access. An attorney she barely knew, and me, her husband, who had answered her crisis with a legal attack. She would seek refuge in a bath. 40 minutes of stillness, not washing, just sitting. Her pregnant stomach a pale island in the water. She would breathe, and she would remember him. I am my father's daughter, she would think. He lost it all at 29. He rebuilt. He spent 30 years building a fortress. I am 37 days from 29. I just have to get there. The baby would move. And she would whisper to it, We will be okay. She would say it with a certainty she did not feel. Then she would call Sylvia, wrapped in a towel on the cold floor. They filed for annulment, she would say, on the grounds of fraud. I knew this was coming, Sylvia would reply, calm, unshaken. This was Sylvia's strength. An annulment simplifies things, she would say. It protects the trust from any marital claims. They are saying, I committed fraud. It is a lie, Sylvia would say. It will not stand. You did not know. We have the proof. Let them file. The words would rearrange in her mind. It was not a defeat. It was a strategy. What should I do? Claire would ask. Nothing, Sylvia would answer. Do nothing. I am meeting Clark Merritt next week. There is another part of your father's plan you need to see. Something about the Prescott shares. Your father was not just an investor, Sylvia would say. He created a specific instrument. When you understand the full design, you will see his true intent. What was his intent? Sylvia would pause. He intended that if we ever came for you, you would already be inside our home. I called that evening. Not my attorney. Me. I almost hoped she would not answer. She let it ring 4 times. Claire. My voice sounded tired. It was not an act. This long war was exhausting. I wanted to tell her things. I need to talk to you, I said. Then talk. I did not want it to be this way. How did you want it to be? A long silence. I was thinking. I was searching for a path that no longer existed. I do not know, I admitted. I thought you might discover the truth about your father, about us, and we could talk. And then what? She asked. What would happen after we talked? Silence again. Donovan, she said. Her voice was not hot with anger. It was cold, final. You married me for the trust. I did not deny it. The moment had arrived. I expected it to feel like a rupture. It felt like a lock clicking into place. The end of one thing, the beginning of the next. Did you ever love me? The question was genuine. She needed to know if any of it was real. A very long pause. I think I did, I said. I think that is what made this so difficult. Loving her made the plan a burden. But the family came first. It always came first. She was worth something to me, but never enough. She had deserved more. I will protect our daughter, she said, whatever happens. I will make sure she is safe. I hope you will be in her life. But I will not wait for you to choose. She ended the call. She went to the window and stared at the city. She was realizing something important. She had become invisible to herself. She had shrunk to fit into a life I built for her. She was done shrinking. She would call Sylvia again. I am ready, she would say, ready for the next move. Clark Merritt came to Sylvia's office on a Tuesday. He carried a briefcase and an air of finality. He was 60 years old. He spoke of vast sums of money like they were trivial. He laid 3 documents on the table. He sat and looked at her. Your father, he said, was a brilliant man, not just for what he built, but for how he built it. He pointed to the first paper. The trust holds the portfolio, $14.3 billion as of last month. It was a fortress built over generations. Technology, real estate, private equity. Each investment was a stone laid with precision, building walls that would stand for centuries. I reviewed the second document. The trust holds 19% of our company, a poison seeded over 11 years, hidden within shell companies. Owen Whitmore, a ghost on paper, but his fingerprints were everywhere. I moved to the third document. I did not know this part. He had found allies, an old banker with 12%, a family trust with 10%. These were minor disputes, gnats to be swatted away. But now I saw the numbers. 19, 12, 10, 41%, a crack in the foundation. He had built a bridge from the grave. I knew Whitmore's methods. He had cultivated them before he died. He presented himself as a victim, a fellow dissident. And he left his daughter as the key, a weapon to be activated. He never left things to chance. Clark's report confirmed my fears. 3 years of correspondence. He earned their trust. He promised a time to act would come. Someone would reach out. He planned for this, for every possibility. After the call from my lawyer, I sat in my study for 25 minutes. The car was not running. I could not bring myself to move yet. I needed to let the betrayal settle. I looked at the dark wood of my desk. I thought about her father. I thought about Owen Whitmore. I remembered him on his porch, reading his paper, drinking his tea, wearing that cheap watch. All the while, he was a spider spinning this web, a 30-year game from a quiet Connecticut home, patient, silent, absolutely certain of his victory. I remembered him at her graduation, the way he had hugged her, a rare display, one that meant something specific. He had whispered a promise to her. You can do anything. I had dismissed it as sentiment. I understood now it was a statement of intent. He had spent 3 decades building the machine to make it true. He constructed the world where her decision would be law. I called my son. Did you know about the Prescott shares? I asked. No. Sylvia told me this morning, he said. I have been in the garden since. A weak laugh came through the phone. The sound of a man breaking. The sound of a loss he could not comprehend. He was really something, she had likely said. He really was. His voice would be soft, full of misplaced admiration. He loved you so much. Everything he built, it was for you. She stayed in that parking lot, gathering a strength that was not hers, a borrowed power. She drove back to that small apartment. She called Preston Vale that evening, my family's lawyer. She had the number from the papers I gave her. He answered with caution, the caution of a man who knew a storm was coming. Miss Whitmore, he said, I am the controlling beneficiary of a trust. Holding 19% of Prescott Holdings, she said. Her voice was cold, learned. I have contacted 2 other shareholders. Together we hold 41%. I think you should discuss this with your clients. A threat before the board meeting. The silence from my end was absolute. I could feel Preston's shock through the phone. Additionally, she said, we have records of certain activities, Garrett Prescott's old firm. Regulators would be very interested. Sylvia Holloway will share them if we cannot find a reasonable arrangement. A reasonable arrangement. The words I used when I handed her a bag of cash, a final command to disappear. I must speak with the family, Preston said. Of course, she replied. You have 48 hours. She hung up. She stood in that borrowed kitchen. In the quiet of that evening, she felt powerful. For the first time since leaving my home, she felt whole. Starting over was no longer a retreat. It was an attack. Staying with us had always been the cage. She simply refused to see the bars until now. 3 weeks before her birthday, my daughter Ainsley called her. I almost wished Claire had not answered, but she remembered Ainsley's weakness. Never cruel, never an ally, but weak. She answered. I heard what Mother did, Ainsley said. No preamble. Direct. A new and unpleasant trait. I want you to know it was wrong. Why are you calling me? Claire asked. A pause. Because I have watched my mother do this my whole life. I have never said a word. You are pregnant. She threw you out. And I am. The sentence broke. It reformed, weaker. I am ashamed of us. The word sounded costly, an admission of weakness. Thank you, Claire said. That matters. If you need anything for the baby. I will let you know, Claire said. She told her friend about the call later. The friend listened. I never understood what you saw in them, she said. I saw it. I just never believed it. Why did you not say something? Because you seemed happy, the friend said. I did not want to take that from you. Claire considered this. She examined the memory. I think I knew, she said at last. I saw the signs. I just chose not to look at them. Yes, her friend said. We do that. The hardest part is admitting I knew. Her friend placed a hand on hers. There was no comfort from me, only the cold rhythm of war. Morning calls with lawyers, afternoon strategy sessions, evening reviews of documents stretching back decades. I was tracing the ghost's steps, unwinding his 30-year game. Eleanor. The name was a whisper in the intelligence I gathered, a presence growing inside the enemy. Every step required calculation. I read the documents. I learned the shape of what Owen Whitmore had built. I learned the names of his companies, his partnerships, his investments. I was learning his arsenal, not as a number, but as a battlefield. I was doing what he had done. I was preparing. The night her water broke, I was reviewing financial projections. The numbers sounded wrong. For 3 days, nothing felt right. A photograph was likely on a bookshelf. A memory of a life I had ended. They would be laughing at nothing, looking young, untroubled. She would think, I was not worried then. I did not know. Now she knows, and she is still standing. That is the problem. Then she would feel it. 3:47 in the morning. She would look down, then at the television, then at the crackers. Renee, she would say. Her friend was asleep. Renee, she said, louder. The sound of a loyal soldier scrambling. What happened? I think it is time, she said. The next 20 minutes were a controlled deployment, an operation they had drilled for, but it was still a surprise. The hospital bag was ready. She found her shoes. The car was called. She called her mother. Then, a deliberate pause. She called Sylvia. A calculated move. Sylvia had asked to be called. She had promised. Sylvia answered on the second ring. It is time, Claire said. I will meet you at the hospital, Sylvia said, and disconnected. She did not call my son. The decision was conscious. A blade twisted with precision. She would tell him after. He could choose his reaction. That would be his first failure. Labor was a singular focus, a narrowing of the world. Everything else, the trust, my family, the petition, the 41%, the 30-year game, it all faded. All that remained was her body, her breathing, her allies, her mother's hand, the specific work of bringing a new weapon into the world. She had Eleanor at 7:42 in the morning. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair, Owen Whitmore's nose. I saw it in the first photo my informant sent. That specific nose, the slight upturn, her father's face on this new enemy. She held her daughter in the sterile hospital light. She said the name she had carried for months, the name decided the week she learned the truth about Owen Whitmore. Eleanor, she said. Eleanor Owen Whitmore, not Prescott. Whitmore. Renee was crying in a chair. Her mother held a cold cup of coffee. Sylvia stood near the door, her hands folded. Her expression was not one of a woman with a secret. It was the face of a woman who had waited to see the end of a story, my story. Donovan called 6 hours later. It was a necessary amputation. The girl, Claire, had the child. Donovan had called, his voice a frayed nerve. I did not answer her call afterward. Sentiment was a liability we could not afford. Our lawyers would handle the details. Everything that needed to be said to her would be said through proper channels, not by a panicked boy in a hospital, but by the cool, firm hand of our family's will. I pictured her there, exhausted and alone. This was for the best. I was protecting my son. I was preserving our future. This child, this Eleanor, was a loose thread. I was simply weaving it back into a pattern I controlled. It was the only right thing to do. The next days were about containment. Reports came in. The girl was with her friends. The baby was healthy. These were merely facts, data points in a larger strategy. Diane, her mother, was there, a predictable complication. Then the message from our council arrived. The trust had transferred $14.3 billion. The number was obscene, a weapon I had not anticipated. My son had not married a vulnerable girl. He had married an heiress armed for war. All my plans, all my careful maneuvers, felt like stone walls against a rising tide. The world had just tilted on its axis. This changed nothing. It changed everything. For days I had seen her as a problem to be managed, a temporary inconvenience. I remembered her in my home, wearing clothes that did not fit our world. Now she was a monarch. She held our ruin in her hands. Preston Vale called. His voice was grim. He had been waiting for the blow to fall. He confirmed what I already knew. The trust was hers. The power was hers. My son's foolishness had brought this upon us. I had failed to see the quiet danger in her father's design. And now we would all pay the price for my oversight. Preston relayed her terms. They were not demands. They were declarations. Full legal custody. A trust for the child. Funded by us. A settlement. Each word was a perfectly placed stone, building a wall between us and my grandchild. She was not interested in punishing us. She was interested in erasing us, in making us irrelevant. And then came the blade. Regulatory documents, Garrett's early ventures, the foundation upon which our fortune was built, a foundation of sand. She was not just ending a marriage. She was threatening to bring down the entire house of Prescott. My son Garrett's past was a ghost we kept locked away. She had found the key. I listened as Preston detailed the threat, a quiet call to the right people, an emergency governance review. It would be a slow, public execution of everything I had built. The silence in my study was absolute. There was no negotiation. There was only surrender. I gave Preston his orders. He had 48 hours. He was to accept. Every single term. We would sign whatever she put in front of us. The cost of refusal was a price I was not willing to pay. We had been outmaneuvered completely. 36 hours. She did not even grant us the courtesy of the full time. They were eager, he had said. No, I thought. They were certain. They knew the rot was deep. I saw the signed papers later. Her signature was firm, unwavering. Sylvia Holloway, her lawyer, likely praised her, told her how proud her father would be. I imagined him, Owen Whitmore, a ghost smiling at his victory. He had not prepared for every version. He had prepared for only one, the one where we lost. Claire had not handled it well. She had simply executed a plan laid decades before she was born. I thought of Owen, the quiet man, the patient man. He had not sought revenge. He had built an empire so vast it made ours look small. He had made the damage we did to him irrelevant. Claire said she finished it. She was wrong. She was merely the final move in a game I never knew I was playing. She walked out of that office lighter, weighted correctly, while I remained, heavier than ever, buried under the weight of my own miscalculation. The sky was overcast. It felt appropriate, a gray, indistinct end to my absolute authority. She requested the meeting, a final piece of theater I was forced to attend. It was not about business. It was about power, something personal, she had said, as if any of this was anything but. She arrived alone. Her blazer was dark. Her bag was unremarkable. On her wrist, she wore his watch. Owen Whitmore's watch. A deliberate, silent statement. It fit her perfectly. A legacy passed down, seamless and strong. She was bringing him with her, to show me that he had won, to show me the ghost that had engineered my defeat. I built this boardroom, marble and glass, a monument to Prescott power. I sat at the head of the table, my rightful place. Garrett was to my left, Donovan was to the side, a spectator to his own life's demolition. She walked in and did not hesitate. She took the seat directly across from me, the center, an open challenge. I looked at her. This was not the girl from the dining room. This was his daughter. And in her eyes, I saw the cold, clear reflection of my own failure. I was meeting the woman I had created. I offered her a strained courtesy. She did not need it. She began to speak, her voice steady. She looked at Donovan. For a moment, I saw something shift in her face. Not anger, pity. She pitied my son. She pitied the thing I had made him, a weak man who followed orders, a man who would watch his own life burn if I told him it was necessary. The pity was worse than hatred. It was a dismissal, an acknowledgement that he, and by extension I, no longer mattered in her world. She spoke of her father, of how he turned fraud into a fortune. He did not seek revenge. He sought irrelevance. He built something so large that the original crime became a footnote, an old story no one cared about. She looked at Garrett, then she looked at me. It was not about revenge. It was about showing us that we were small, that our power was an illusion. In that quiet boardroom, I finally understood. I had spent my life fighting battles. Owen Whitmore had simply built a new world where I was not invited. It was the only way. I watched him look at her, truly look. My son, Garrett. In his eyes, I saw a flicker of something weak, respect. He was seeing a victor in a war he never knew existed. I had been fighting it for years. Your father was a formidable man, I said. My voice was a flat line, an observation, a fact. He had been a poison in our veins. You are very like him. It was not a compliment. It was a diagnosis, an acknowledgement of the disease I was finally cutting out. She took it as a prize. She stood. She offered a hand to my son. She gave me a final useless nod. Her gaze fell on Donovan, my other, weaker son, a final command from her. Then she was gone. I watched her walk to the elevator. The doors closed, sealing her away. A necessary amputation. The body of this family could now heal. I felt the clean, cold relief of a surgeon's work well done. Her father's watch was on her wrist. A final insult. A trophy she carried out of my house. She took the money. It was the price of our purity. A fortune to remove a stain. I knew what she would do with it. She would shrink. She would retreat to some quaint, meaningless life. A white house on a quiet street. It proved she never understood true power. Power is not a door you leave open. It is a fortress you build, stone by stone, generation by generation. My home was a fortress. Hers would be a dollhouse. Her allies would be predictable. The mother, the common friend. They would bring her wine and coffee and plants that could not die. I heard of Ainsley's visit, my foolish, soft-hearted niece, bearing gifts to the enemy. It was a weakness I would have to correct. Sentiment is a rot that can bring down empires. I would not allow it to fester in my own family. Then came the letter from Donovan, written on our family stationery, a plea for forgiveness. He was apologizing for not being good enough for her father. It was a profound failure of breeding. He was a Prescott, apologizing to a Whitmore. The shame of it burned cold in my gut. She had corrupted him completely. This was the final proof that I had done the right thing. She would tell her daughter stories, lies. She would paint her grandfather as a saint, a man who built from love. I knew the truth. He built from envy. He built from a quiet, simmering rage against families like mine. He spent his life plotting. He crafted his daughter into a key, designed to fit the lock of my family's house and unlock it from within. I remember him, the quiet man, the patient builder. I saw what others missed, the ambition behind the simple life. the strategy behind the love, 30 years of work. He did not earn a name. He forged a weapon. And I was the only one who had seen it coming. I should have acted sooner, before he worked his way so deep inside my walls. He called it independence, a door she could always walk through. A clever lie. He gave her a fortune, but took her from a dynasty. He isolated her. He left her with nothing but money. Money is fleeting. Legacy is eternal. He did not give her a door to freedom. He led her to a gilded cage in the wilderness, far from the real power she could have held. She thought our life was the cage. She never understood. It is a citadel. It has rules and duties that protect us, that have protected us for a century. She thought the walls were a prison. She tried to redecorate them to her own small tastes. She was the warden of her own weakness. She was so busy complaining about the cage that she never realized she was unworthy of it. She will watch the light change. She will find given meaning in quiet moments. Her father's favorite time of day. How quaint! My father's favorite time was the moment a deal closed, the moment a rival admitted defeat. Those are the significant moments. The rest is just waiting. Wasted time. She can have the sunsets. I will keep the empire. I held Owen's watch once, before she took it. It was plain, functional, a tool for a man who measured his life in calculated minutes. I feel no ache, only the cold clarity of victory. There is no room for anything but the future. I look at my family. I see the damage she has left behind, the doubt in their eyes. It does not matter. We are going to be fine. I will make sure of it. That is the simple, eternal truth. The verdict was a failure, a stain upon the order of things. The light drained from the sky. It bled from blue into the cold, bruised dark of evening. The first stars emerged like splinters of glass. She held the child against her chest. A warm, solid symbol of my defeat, a living insult. I watched from the shadows. She had $14 billion. My dollars. And a signed paper she called justice. A daughter named for my enemy, Owen Whitmore. A White House in Connecticut with a porch that watched the sun set on my world. She had her allies, a friend arriving on Saturdays with coffee and insignificant green things. She had a mother in Fairfield making her calls every morning. She had some lawyer in Hartford, a man who guarded a dead man's delusion for 4 years, never once breaking. She had a new chapter, one torn from the pages of my life. She possessed, for the first time, the false and fleeting sense that she was where she belonged, not because she earned it, but because she had stolen it. Because she stumbled through a door her father spent 30 years failing to open. And now she stood on the other side, her whole life ahead of her, a life she did not deserve, a life that required my permission. The darkness deepened. She stayed. Owen Whitmore's daughter, on her porch, in the last light, with her own child sleeping against her heart. Exactly where she believed she had chosen to be. Exactly wrong. This story is not a lesson. It is a correction. Every detail will be carefully managed by me. My purpose is to restore the proper order, to deliver a final, meaningful consequence. No matter how hard she pretends, her story is almost over. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.